On June 13, 2025, the simmering conflict between Israel and Iran exploded into open warfare, shattering years of uneasy tension and covert operations. What had long been a shadowy struggle of sabotage, cyber attacks, and proxy battles suddenly erupted into the open, with the world watching in disbelief as the region was plunged into chaos overnight. Under the codename Rising Lion, Israel launched a massive preemptive strike deep inside Iran, targeting its nuclear and missile programs. Dozens of Israeli aircraft crossed hostile airspace, unleashing precision-guided munitions on facilities believed to be at the heart of Iran's nuclear ambitions. The operation was meticulously planned, aiming to cripple Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons and to send a clear message to Tehran and the world. This was a dramatic escalation. No longer a shadow war, but a direct assault on Iran's military and scientific core. Key research centers, missile depots, and command posts were left in ruins. The strikes not only targeted infrastructure, but also sought to disrupt Iran's chain of command and its ability to retaliate quickly. The world reacted with shock as global markets tumbled and leaders scrambled to contain the crisis. Oil prices soared, and emergency meetings were called in capitals from Washington to Beijing. Ordinary people across the globe watched live news coverage, anxious about what this escalation could mean for the future of the Middle East and for global stability. In this video, we'll break down what happened, who was targeted, and why Israel took this extraordinary risk. We'll analyze the strategic calculations behind the operation, the intelligence that may have prompted it, and the potential consequences for the region and beyond. We'll also examine Iran's immediate response, from military mobilization to fiery rhetoric, and the global fallout as nations rush to prevent further escalation. The streets of Tehran filled with protests, while international leaders issued urgent calls for restraint and dialogue. The decisions made in the coming days will determine if this crisis is contained or spirals into a devastating regional war. As diplomats gather and militaries brace for further conflict, the world holds its breath, hoping for a path to peace amid the uncertainty. Operation Rising Lion targeted over 100 sites across Iran, focusing on its nuclear and military infrastructure. The Natanz uranium enrichment facility, central to Iran's nuclear ambitions, was heavily damaged, crippling thousands of centrifuges. Tehran itself was struck, with explosions rocking the city and damaging key command centers. Strikes extended to Tabriz, Isfahan, Kermanshah, and Khorramabad, hitting research centers, missile bases, and airports. Israeli jets and pre-positioned drones overwhelmed Iran's air defenses, demonstrating unprecedented intelligence and operational reach. Mossad reportedly smuggled explosive drones into Iran months in advance, activating them remotely for precise, coordinated attacks. The scale and precision of the assault stunned military analysts worldwide. No part of Iran was beyond Israel's reach. Israel's strikes weren't just about infrastructure. They targeted Iran's top military and scientific leaders. Major General Hossein Salami, commander-in-chief of the IRGC, and Major General Mohammad Bagheri, Chief of Staff, were killed, leaving a power vacuum. Other high-profile casualties included Gholam Ali Rashid and Amir Ali Hajizadeh, key figures in Iran's military and missile programs. Two leading nuclear scientists, Feridun Abbasi and Mohammad Tehranchi, were also assassinated. The loss of these leaders and experts is a devastating blow to Iran's command structure and nuclear program. Israeli intelligence demonstrated deep penetration of Iran's security apparatus. The immediate aftermath: chaos and confusion at the highest levels of Iranian leadership. Iran's ability to coordinate a response was severely compromised. Tehran's response was immediate and furious. Supreme Leader Khamenei vowed bitter revenge, calling the attack terrorism and promising Israel would pay a heavy price. Iran launched over 100 drones at Israel, most intercepted with help from US and regional allies. The drone attack was more symbolic than destructive, signaling Iran's willingness to retaliate. Iranian officials promised a sustained campaign of retribution, not a one-off response. The government clamped down on information, restricting internet access and focusing on national unity. Iran now faces the challenge of balancing the need for revenge with the risk of provoking even greater devastation. The coming days will test the regime's ability to survive and respond. In Jerusalem, Prime Minister Netanyahu addressed the nation and the world. framing the operation as a last resort to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. He spoke with a sense of gravity, emphasizing that the stakes could not be higher. According to Netanyahu, the threat posed by Iran's nuclear ambitions was not just a distant possibility, but an immediate and existential danger to the state of Israel and its people. He called Iran an existential threat, insisting Israel had no choice but to act. Netanyahu argued that the window for peaceful solutions had closed and that Israel's very survival was on the line. He described the operation as a necessary step, taken only after exhausting every diplomatic avenue. Israeli military leaders echoed this message, describing the strikes as a fight for national survival. They detailed the careful planning and coordination that went into the operation, underscoring the seriousness with which the threat was regarded. The generals emphasized that the mission was not about aggression, but about defending the nation's future. The attack followed a critical report from the International Atomic Energy Agency, which accused Iran of breaching its non-proliferation obligations. This report provided Israel with a measure of international justification, as it highlighted the growing concerns within the global community about Iran's nuclear program. The timing of the operation was no coincidence. It was a direct response to mounting evidence and international alarm. Israel argued that years of negotiations and diplomatic efforts had failed to halt Iran's progress. The government insisted that all peaceful options had been exhausted and that only decisive military action could stop Iran's nuclear ambitions before it was too late. In the aftermath, the country mobilized for war. Hospitals moved patients underground to protect them from possible missile attacks. Army reserves were called up in record numbers and air defense systems were placed on the highest alert. The entire nation braced itself for the possibility of a wider conflict, with every citizen feeling the weight of the moment. Across Israel, civilians took shelter in bomb shelters, anxiously watching the news for updates. Government officials addressed the public, urging calm and unity in the face of uncertainty. Streets emptied as people prepared for potential retaliation, but the government remained steadfast, insisting that the strike was vital for the nation's long-term security. Through it all, Israel's message to the world was clear. Survival comes first, whatever the cost. The nation stood united, determined to defend itself against any threat, no matter how great the risk or sacrifice required. The strikes on nuclear sites like Natanz raised fears of radiological disaster. Damaging such facilities risks radioactive contamination that could spread across borders. The IAEA expressed grave concern, monitoring the situation closely. Iran claimed to have contained any leaks, but independent verification was impossible amid the chaos. Experts warned of long-term risks. Damage containment could lead to future accidents or environmental crises. The attacks set a dangerous precedent, undermining global non-proliferation efforts. The psychological impact was immediate: fear of invisible radiation and panic across the region. The world now faces the reality of open conflict involving advanced nuclear programs. The international response to the escalating crisis was swift and multifaceted, reflecting the deep anxieties rippling through global capitals. Leaders from around the world issued statements that ranged from outright condemnation of the violence to measured support for their allies, but a common thread ran through them all: urgent calls for restraint and dialogue. As news of the strike spread, diplomatic channels buzzed with activity, and the world watched anxiously, hoping to avoid a wider conflict. The United States, while firmly denying any direct involvement in the attacks, made it clear that it would not tolerate further escalation. American officials emphasized the importance of protecting their personnel and interests in the region, warning Iran and other actors against any retaliatory moves. Behind the scenes, military readiness was heightened, and contingency plans were reviewed, underscoring the seriousness with which Washington viewed the unfolding events. The United Nations, along with key European powers, issued strong condemnations of the strikes, calling them a dangerous provocation. European diplomats, speaking from the steps of their parliaments and at the UN, urged both sides to step back from the brink and return to negotiations. They warned that continued hostilities could have devastating consequences not just for the region, but for the entire world. Russia, meanwhile, labeled the attack a clear violation of international law and called for an immediate ceasefire. Gulf states, deeply concerned about the potential for a regional spillover, convened emergency meetings and issued joint statements urging all parties to de-escalate. Their leaders warned that the fragile balance in the Middle East could be shattered, with unpredictable consequences for millions. The impact of the crisis was felt almost immediately on the ground. Airspace closures and widespread flight cancellations rippled across the region, stranding travelers and disrupting vital commercial routes. Airports that were once bustling with activity fell eerily silent as uncertainty gripped the skies. Global markets reacted with alarm. Oil prices surged to their highest levels in months, reflecting fears of supply disruptions. Financial markets from New York to Tokyo reeled at the prospect of a wider war, with investors scrambling to assess the risks and protect their assets. The world was reminded once again of just how fragile stability in the Middle East is, and how quickly local tensions can threaten global security. Border checkpoints tightened and security forces increased their presence in major cities as governments braced for possible unrest. In the midst of uncertainty, the crisis underscored the urgent need for renewed diplomacy and dialogue, tools that now seem more elusive than ever. As leaders search for a path forward, the world holds its breath, hoping that cooler heads will prevail before the situation spirals further out of control. The strikes have pushed the Middle East to the edge of a regional war. Iran's network of proxy forces, Hezbollah, militias in Syria and Iraq, could launch a multi-front assault on Israel. Neighboring states like Jordan and Iraq risk being drawn in, their airspace already used in the attacks. Gulf states hosting US bases could become targets if Iran retaliates against American interests. The risk of miscalculation is sky high. A single mistake could trigger uncontrollable escalation. The Abraham Accords and years of diplomacy are now under threat. Extremist groups may exploit the chaos, further destabilizing the region. The fear, this is not just another round of fighting, but the start of a prolonged, bloody war. As of June 13, 2025, the Middle East stands on a knife's edge. Israel's attack has shattered the old order, replacing shadow war with open conflict. Iran must now choose how to respond, retaliate forcefully, or risk even greater devastation. The world watches, hoping for restraint, but the power to de-escalate lies with two sworn enemies. The hope for diplomacy is fading fast. The coming days will reveal whether this crisis can be contained or if the region is headed for catastrophe. For now, the drums of war echo across the Middle East, and the path to peace has never seemed more distant.